I'm a criminologist. My name is Daniela, and I'm Roma. Roma are the largest ethnic minority in Europe. About 10 to 12 million people live across this continent. But despite centuries of culture, language, and history, there is only one thing that often defines us. And that one thing is called suspicion. Which means, depending on who you ask, I'm here to analyze crime or rather apologize for it. When I decided to study criminology, obviously it wasn't because I was obsessed with crime statistics. I was interested in one single sentence that I heard while I was growing up. And I'm pretty sure each of you knows that sentence very well. The sentence is the following. I'm not a racist, but I'm not a racist, but Daniela, Roma still. I'm not a racist, but Roma don't want to work. I'm not a racist, but you people, we people. And the interesting thing is that this is rarely about crime. Roma are blamed for many things: crime, welfare, laziness, and that's my favorite one, elections. Somehow, when something goes wrong, we are part of the explanation. So I became interested in different types of questions. One of them is the following, and not whether crime exists. Crime exists everywhere. But my question became this: why do some groups become permanent suspects in society? So let me tell you, or let's talk about the 3 stereotypes that appear over and over everywhere. The first is Roma steal. The second, Roma are lazy. And the third one appears in every circle elections. And I do expect now, in 1 month and a half, Roma to become very important again here. So Roma sell their votes, and they decide elections. 2 statements sound confident, but they usually look in only at the outcomes. And here is what actually criminology does differently. Criminology is obsessed with the cause, with the consequences, and with the conditions. Let's look at a few numbers. Across several European countries, about 34% of Roma are unemployed. More than half of Roma youth, around 56%, are not in education, employment, or training. And here is the number that usually surprises people. About 39% of Roma who have jobs are still poor. Yes, they work and they still poor. And that's what economy calls working poor. Inequality also begins very early. Only about 51% of Roma children attending preschool. While in a wider European population, the number is closer to 94%. So before school even begins, the starting line is already different. So when someone asks me Roma or says to me Roma are lazy, I like to take out the statistics because data tells us something different. During my criminology studies, I worked for a short period inside a prison in London, including time connected to the Pentonville prison. One thing that experience taught me when I walked in the prison, it was something very quick and very, very clear. And that was that they don't organize people by ethnicity. They organize people by patterns: low education, childhood instability, poverty, and violence, and etc. So when you walk through a prison, you are not looking at ethnic groups. You are looking at concentrated disadvantage. But public perception is shaped less by data and more by narratives. And let me give you an example about the narratives. Open a website and you will look at the language. You will see headlines like, Roma gang arrested, Roma thieves robs an elderly woman, Roma clan involved into robbery. But when someone from the majority commits a crime, the headlines looks different. Men arrested, businessmen investigated, suspect detained. So, one headline describes people, the other describes person. And slowly, a narrative forms. Crime by minorities become a collective identity, and crime by majorities becomes individual. So let's talk about the elections, my favorite part. Because every few years, we hear the same sentence. Roma sell their votes. Let's be honest. Vote buying exists. But the real question is not who sells votes. The real question is what kind of political system produces voters who must choose between democracy and dinner? And here, I will tell you something very interesting that neuroscience shows us. And this is very important. When people live under constant economic stress, the brain shifts into survival mode. In survival mode, the brain focuses on the immediate. Food today, safety today, rent today. Long-term thinking becomes difficult. Democracy requires the opposite. Democracy requires stability. It requires the ability to think about the future. So when someone asks why people sell their votes, we should ask, is democracy really a choice when survival is the priority? Because when your biggest concern is which political party should govern the country, you are already living in stability. But when your biggest concern is feeding your children tonight, democracy becomes very, very abstract. Why people are always to blame? The French philosopher René Girard once wrote that societies often stabilize themselves by creating scapegoats, a group that absorbs the blame for complex problems. Why? Because it simplifies reality. If crime exists, blame the minority. If poverty exists, blame the poor. If institutions fail, blame those with the least power to defend themselves. Scapegoats are very efficient. So let me finish with the question that I started this journey, why are always Roma to blame? Because for me, the better question is this: why society keeps searching for easy explanation instead of confronting conditions that actually produce crime? Because crime never comes from the ethnicity. An environment can always change. But there is something else about Roma communities that is rarely discussed. That is something that I'm very proud of, but I also see it as our biggest weakness. And that thing is our resilience. Because of our resilience, we do have this tolerance for a high level of pain. Because we are so resilient that we can survive anything in any conditions. We can always make it day to day. But at the same time, because of that, we are not able to progress more because we are stuck in this cycle of surviving. There are thousands of Roma who are doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs, engineers, artists, and students. Some of them are visible, some of them are not. And some of them even, or most of us, choose to hide their identity. But that's rarely because of shame. That's most because stigma of being blamed, of being the scapegoat, It's still very, very powerful, even in our society. But the moment, if we have a moment to look and we start looking beyond suspicion, something interesting happens. We stop seeing a problem to manage, and we start seeing people with potential. Because the same principle in criminology teaches us about crime is also about opportunity. When environments improve, outcomes change. And when opportunity appears, talent appears with it. So maybe the real question is not why are always Roma to blame. Perhaps the question is this: what could Europe gain if finally stopped seeing Roma as a problem and started seeing 12 million people, citizens, as a part of a future, of its future, of each European country and Europe as a continent? At the same time, Bulgaria, for example, and as many countries in Europe, will experience labor shortages. And those labor shortages are not only that, it's aging population and slow productivity. Millions of workers will be needed across sectors like healthcare, construction, services, and technology. At the same time, millions of Roma citizens remained excluded from full participation of the labor market. This is not only a social problem, but it's also an economic contradiction. Research conducted across several European countries shows that better economic inclusion of Roma could generate around 10 billion euros every year of the European economies, simply by removing the barriers that prevent people from studying, working, being in training, and contributing. In other words, the same communities that are often framed as scapegoats could in fact become a part of Europe's economic solution. So maybe the question is not why Roma are always guilty. Maybe the question is this: what could Europe gain if finally stopped looking for someone to blame and it started recognizing us as citizens, as a part of its future? Because potential, it's not hypothetical. It's already here. I'm Roma, and my name is Daniela. I'm a criminologist, and I'm one of many Roma you might not see on television, but who are already part of Europe's future. Thank you.